Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a horror thriller film named The Goat and Her Three Kids. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a family living in a remote, secluded countryside. The mother raised three sons. The two older boys were quite the mischievous rascals, but the youngest son named Mare was obedient and sensible. They had lived happily until one day, the naughty older brothers accidentally set fire to the grain storehouse. Despite the mother's desperate attempts to put out the fire, the stockpiled grain was lost to the flames. The two brothers showed no signs of remorse and continued bullying Mare. The mother scolded them sternly. Realizing the trouble they had caused, the two lowered their heads, apologetically accepting their fault. With the situation as it was, she swallowed her anger and ushered the children off to bed. Mare was the first to rise early the next morning, unlike his lazy older brothers. As a young lad, he felt a strong desire to shoulder more responsibilities and help his mother with household chores. He went about his tasks, completing everything that needed to be done. His two brothers had already scampered off into the forest, but he dutifully collected the chicken eggs. His efforts that day yielded a bountiful harvest. As he was getting ready to head home, he saw a strange figure on the hillside. In the blink of an eye, the figure vanished. Mare narrated this to his mother. To be on the safe side, she sent him to fetch his two disobedient brothers. Bouncing with enthusiasm, Mare ran towards the woods, oblivious to a scruffy-looking man spying from nearby. The forest was dark and damp. He called out for his brothers, but there was no response, only the echoing roars of wild beasts. Terrified, Mare sprinted back to the forest's entrance. Casting a fearful glance over his shoulder, he was struck by a clump of mud. His brothers had played a cruel prank on him and warned him not to tattle to their mother. Then they chased after Mare, intent on teaching him a lesson. The man who had been lurking nearby now emerged, startling the mother, who was drawing water. He was the children's godfather and a friend of her deceased husband. Ever since she became a widow, this man had come knocking more often than not, seemingly with hormone motives. The mother knew what he was after, but rejected his hormone advances. After her husband's death, all she wanted was to raise her children in peace. However, the man was relentless. Despite his assurance that he would never harm the boys, he whispered that loneliness could drive a person mad and warned her to be careful, adding that they'd be meeting again soon. His words sent a chill down the mother's spine, and she hastily shut the door. It wasn't until the boys came home that she finally felt at ease. At dinner, the mother informed her children that the granary had been destroyed, so she would have to go to town to buy food the next day. She instructed everyone to stay home and look after the house, promising she would return before nightfall. After dinner, as the children prepared for bed, the mother was still working under the lamp, shaping wool. She planned to exchange these items for other supplies. Unable to sleep, the children pestered her for a bedtime story. The mother then began to tell a fairy tale named The Goat and Her Three Kids, which is about a goat mother struggling to protect her baby goats from the big bad wolf. However, unbeknownst to everyone, the godfather who spent his days outside was eavesdropping like a peeping Tom. When Mare got up in the middle of the night to use the toilet, the man hid behind a wooden hut. The groggy Mare, however, noticed nothing and went back to his room, lantern in hand. Early the next morning, the mother reminded her three sons to keep the door locked under any circumstances, unless they heard her voice. The children readily agreed. She then left the house, card in tow. Mare watched as his mother disappeared into the morning fog. Then he turned around to lock the bolt on their door. However, no sooner had their mother left than his brothers forgot their promise and began to bully Mare in the house. Mare climbed up to the roof beams, leaving his brothers in a tough spot. Suddenly, there was a strange noise from outside the house. The curious boys decided to call a truce and gathered by the window to see what was going on. They could only hear someone whistling a tune. It was the same song their mother was singing before she left. The older brothers wanted to open the door, but Mare insisted they couldn't open the door unless they heard their mother's voice. Moreover, he had seen some strange people on the mountaintop the day before. However, the eldest brother argued that nobody else could be out nowhere humming that song besides their mother. Unhappy with Mare's assertiveness, he pushed him aside and unlocked the door. To their surprise, it wasn't their mother outside, but their godfather. The eldest brother was about to greet him when he noticed the man reaching for a dagger at his waist. Realizing the danger, he attempted to close the door, but he was no match to an adult. The man pushed the door open forcefully, grabbed the eldest brother hiding behind it, and threw him to the ground like an adult toy. Mare, hiding under the stove, watched as his brother was thrown onto the ground motionless. Although he was terrified, he forced himself to stay silent. Only when the man entered the house did he approach the door. However, the godfather had locked the door from the outside. If he tried to unbolt it, it would make a sound. When the man inside the room heard the noise, he put down the women's clothes he was holding. As he turned around to check, he stepped on a puddle on the ground. The second brother had wet himself in fear and was now shivering underneath the feeding trough. The man drew his dagger and scraped it across the floor, producing a sharp noise. The second brother quickly hid in the corner, but the man grabbed his ankle. The dagger cut through his boot, making him cry out in pain. Just then, there was a noise at the door, as if someone was trying to unlock it. The man quickened his actions, cleaned his dagger on his sleeve, and went to the door. He assumed that the youngest child had already fled, but hearing the creaking sound of the wooden door, he knew that the youngest son was still hiding in the house. He started to search all around, his gaze falling onto the stove. However, there was no one under the table. The only possible hiding spot was the narrow chimney, but the man was too big and he could only stretch in one arm. The tight space was insufficient for his big muscles, so he stopped. But the man was not satisfied. He picked up the iron axe from the yard, and while humming a familiar ballad, he began to chop incessantly. The cross on the wall was splattered with fresh blood. Mare was covering his ears, hiding in the chimney until the man left carrying two bodies. After that, he stumbled out from the stove, only to find the room in disarray. Overcome by something he saw, he fainted to the ground. By the time the sun had set, the mother finally returned home with her load. But before she could reach the door, she was shocked by the scene in front of her. She stumbled and fell to the ground, uttering a painful wail. She then saw two heads display on the windowsill. Mare heard his mother's voice. He slowly unlocked the heavy door. Seeing Mare unharmed, the mother rushed over to hold him. Following the trail of blood on the floor, the mother was led to the horrific crime scene. She urgently questioned the surviving son. Sobbing, Mare recounted that his brothers had heard a strange whistling sound. They didn't let anyone open the door and acted on their own. When the godfather burst in, the eldest brother hid behind the door and the second brother under the feeding trough. But they were all caught. Only he himself, due to hiding in the chimney, had a fortunate escape. Upon hearing the perpetrator, the mother was overwhelmed with grief. She never could have imagined that merely rejecting a man's advances would drive him to commit such an atrocity, murdering innocent lives. Trembling, she removed an object from the windowsill. The tragic events that transpired at home have caused this once devout believer to lose her faith in God. She took down the cross from the wall and spent the night scrubbing the bloodstains. Eventually, she managed to clean the wall. She carried Mare back to his bed, then returned to clean the floor. Having been through a terrifying ordeal, Mare fell into a deep sleep, but his dreams were restless. In the pitch-black room, he was jolted awake by the sound of a stone hitting the floor. The creaking noises from the floorboards were unnerving in the silent night. Startled, Mare quickly got up and called out for his mom, but the only response was another stone hitting the floor. Just as he was about to get out of bed, the godfather's voice boomed like thunder. He kept calling out the boy, like a ghost coming to claim his life. Mare was so frightened that he woke up from his sleep and crawled into his mom's arms. From that day on, Mare was too scared to go to the bathroom alone. His mom kept watch for him. Once he came out, she would wrap her cloak around him and cradle him in her arms. The family's peaceful life was shattered. Seeing her son's clothes, Mom couldn't stop her tears. The loss of her sons filled her with rage. She was determined to make this brutal man pay. However, given the power imbalance, Mom had no choice but to plot her revenge carefully. First, she gathered the reserves from her pantry to prepare for a feast. The intent behind this was to invite the godfather over. She planned to concoct a trap to ensnare the strong man. To this end, she collected a great deal of firewood in the forest and painstakingly whittled down one of the legs of a wooden stool overnight. Her determination for vengeance focused her. The stool leg had to be just right. Not too thick, lest it won't break, and not too thin, it can't break at the first sit. Mare couldn't understand why she was doing this, especially as she always preached about following the Lord's guidance and not seeking revenge herself. The mother didn't explain much, only stating that sometimes one must rely on oneself. She jabbed a sharp knife into the stool, her tone seething with anger, declaring that if that man dared to step foot in here again, he would pay a hefty price. After putting the children to bed, the mother spent the night digging a pit, her fury making her too impatient to wait. With the arrival of the dawn's light, everything had been set up. She neatly laid a pristine carpet over the trap and set the table with an impressive array of cutlery. After one last check of the soup pot, she instructed Mare to stay obediently at home. With that, she wrapped her headscarf and followed the trail of blood down the mountain. However, the forest leaves were thick, and the blood traces disappeared into the cracks. Disheartened, she turned to leave, but heard the cawing of crows behind her. As carrion eaters, they always circle near corpses. This undoubtedly pointed her in the right direction. She continued her journey following the crow's sounds and successfully located the man's camp. The pool of blood on the ground brought tears to her eyes, the hatred in her heart deepening yet another notch. At this moment, the man was sound asleep, leaning against a large tree. The sound of a mother's footsteps woke him up. He turned to see a woman standing on a hillside, and he swiftly closed the door behind him. The mother, seeking revenge for her kids, played ignorant. Both greeted each other, each with their own ulterior motives. The man, thinking his pretense was perfect, did not change his insolent behavior and approached to make conversation. The mother explained the purpose of her visit. Distraught from the loss of her sons, she decided to host a banquet in their memory to commemorate their being with God. As the godfather of her sons, she hoped he would attend. The man agreed readily and said that he was also interested in attending the banquet. The mother did not continue the conversation. She simply turned around and went straight back home. Mare, who had been dozing off on the windowsill, was suddenly awakened. The sight of the godfather outside the window sent shivers down his spine. Fortunately, his mother's voice rang out from the doorway, and he felt safe enough to open the door. The man was sizing up the surroundings. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that the feast was laid out, but no guests were present. The mother led the man to a seat, claiming that the others were still on their way. In front of the sumptuous food, the man quickly let his guard down. His mother kept pouring him wine, but then something unexpected happened. The man had kicked his chair back. The rigged wooden leg of the chair didn't hit the ground, making it hard for it to break and topple over. The mother was anxious as the man kept feasting. His eyes, however, kept wandering over her. Finally, the man could no longer restrain himself and pulled her into his arms. The mother struggled desperately, and the chair leg wobbled. The man held her tight, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free. Fortunately, the voice of Mare echoed from behind. He emerged from the kitchen holding a ladle of soup. Seeing this, the godfather reined himself in a bit, and the mother managed to escape from the predicament. Mare was extremely nervous upon seeing this man, especially when he heard him asking where he'd been hiding. This was a veiled reference to the events of the past few days. Mare was so frightened that he couldn't speak. The man was relentless, preparing to drag the child. The mother tried to pull Mare away, but the godfather suddenly felt something amiss beneath him. The sound of a chair leg breaking echoed. In his panic, he tried to grasp onto something. Mare was held in his mother's arms and wasn't toppled over by the man. Losing his balance, the godfather fell hard into a trap. Underneath the carpet was a pit filled with oily soil. To aid in combustion, wool and branches were scattered within. The moment for revenge had come. The mother struck a match, and the pit was instantly ablaze. The man's clothes served as fuel, and the flames engulfed him. Howls of agony echoed around. Instead of fleeing with her scared son, the mother stayed by the trap, pushing the man back each time he tried to crawl out. The thrill of revenge kept her shouting angrily, denouncing the sins committed by the man. To prevent him from being burnt to death directly, she smothered the fire with a pile of hay. The godfather was disfigured by the burns, howling that he was dying. The mother closed her eyes, wondering if her kids had felt as desperate. Tears of despair slid down her cheeks again. The mother then picked up a stone from the ground, showing no mercy as she threw it into the pit the man. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.